When you, as a customer, or when the customer gets their CS time clock, they would get a white box shown on the screen. The white box has got a couple of components in, and the first one will be the clock, which I'm pointing out with an arrow on screen at the moment. I think it's a little blue mark on your screen. The second component that comes with is a power supply. The power supply is a 110 to 250 volt rated power supply, so it would work in the US and most UK and European countries, even in Australia. The connector is what we call in South Africa, kettle plug connector. It is a standard PC connector, so any cable and power connector would do to connect this to your power outlets. The third component, which you can see on the screen below the power supply, also now highlighted in white, in a blue arrow, is the spare network cable, and there is a little manual in, and there are a couple of screws and wall plugs to assist you in installing the clock. When you take the clock out of the box, it will look like the clock I've got on screen at the moment. The one on screen is a fingerprint reader clock, and in this shape we have two basic clock models, one with a fingerprint reader and one without a fingerprint reader, and they'll look exactly the same except for the highlighted area on screen now. Each clock has stand built-in keypad and a proximity reader, so it's important to know that if a customer wants to use his fingerprints to clock in and out, he can, but the clock has also got an option for him to use what they call a proximity or an RFI tag, which will always work on the clock, or he can type in his PIN code number on the clock as well. So the clock as standard is always proximity and keypad enabled. The fingerprint reader is the additional item. A prox clock and a keypad reader clock is what we refer to as a model 3350, and the one with the fingerprint reader installed on is a model 3370. When you turn the clock around slightly, in preparation of an installation, you will see that there is two screws at the bottom, and these screws secure the cover of the clock to the back plate, and I'll show you how to move forward from that shortly. At this point, I also want to highlight the USB port on the clock. All our clocks has access to a USB port. It allows for clock backups. You can back up the clock database onto the USB. It allows you to upgrade the firmware of the clock from USB. Imagine places where you've got a clock installed and the clock hasn't got access to the internet. You can put the firmware upgrade on the USB, take the USB, put it in the clock, and upgrade the clock's firmware from the USB stick. And the third, probably the most important feature, is that you can transfer data from the USB port of the clock to your PC and view that data either in TNA, which is our software program for time and attendance, or in pure Excel format as well. So you can see a person's employees, data, clocking data, and hours in Excel format. All right. Now, in preparation of installing the clock, we're going to try and remove the two screws. At the bottom, I've highlighted one, and then on the bottom left, there's another screw. When we ship the clock, we provide two extra screws. You'll see in Corinne's hand. She's a hand model at CapeSoft. In her hand, there is a Allen key. I think that's a universal name for a 8-way screwdriver, and there is two spare screws in case we drop one or two while doing installation. The Allen key is then used to unscrew the screws from the casing at the bottom. Once the screws have been unscrewed at the bottom of the clock, you're now ready to lift the back plate off the clock. The back plate essentially clips into the top of the clock. I've highlighted the top of the clock with the blue arrow. And so in this area here, it clips into the top of the clock. And then by leveraging it upwards, you will basically unclip the backplate from the clock, as shown in this picture. And the backplate separates, as shown, very, very nicely from the clock. And you'll see on the backplate, let me get my drawing tool out again, which I think was the culprit the last time. You'll see on the clock, on the backplate of the clock, there is 3 keyholes. I've highlighted with my blue marker again. Those 3 keyholes will give you a mounting ability to put the backplate on a wall or a drywall. And once you've put the screws into the drywall, the backplate will just clip over the screws and then push downwards, which will lock the clock backplate in place. Once you've got the backplate out of the way, preparation for installation will be the next phase, is to install the power cable as well as the Ethernet cable. Probably, if you're inclined, the easiest way to do it is to remove the cover plate of the clock. The cover plate, Doreen is indicating with how it's with a 1 screw, but the cover plate protects the electronics of the clock, especially from installers who like to slip screwdrivers through and things like that. This cover plate makes sure that it doesn't happen. There is an area on the clock which is exposed. I've highlighted that with my blue marker now. This area is exposed because that is where your network cable will plug in, your power cable will plug in. So it is an option for you just to slip your network cable through and your power cable through without having to take the cover plate off. But for completeness of this exercise, we're going to show you how to take the cover plate off as well. That said, if you find taking the 3 additional screws off too tedious, you can slip the power cable and the network cable through the bottom. I've highlighted the bottom over here, underneath the cover plate with the 4 holes over there, and through towards the connector, the electronics of the clock. Now, everyone says, what are those 4 holes that I've now shown on screen? Those 4 holes are for ventilation. No, I lie. Those 4 holes are for a cable tie, which you can put through as a strain release. And I'll show you in the next couple of slides how to use the strain release. So it just prevents someone tugging at the bottom of your clock onto the cables and then pulling out all the electronics of the clock. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, Corinne is now deftly showing us how to remove the screws from the cover plate. She's taken the bottom one off. She'll take the top right one off and the top left one as well. And then the cover plate simply flips open, and you can now see on screen that all the electronics of the clock is exposed. Again, it's not necessary to remove the cover plate, but for completion of or for complete training, we've included this as an option. All right. Tip of the day: don't keep the clock and the screwdriver in the same hand when you open the back plate of the clock. You don't want to put the screwdriver in there. Once you've removed the cover plate, it is actually quite easy now to take a cable tie. Corinne is pointing out the cable tie, and I've given her some blue nail polish. Once you've removed the cover plate, you can put a cable tie through the ventilation holes that I've indicated earlier, and slip the cables through and tie the cable tie down quite nicely. The network cable is a grey cable, and the power cable is a black cable. The power cable is connected to the power supply I showed you in the box earlier, and comes with a, probably not as, you can't see it as well on this picture, but it's a 90-degree barrel connector 12-volt barrel connector. Alright, now that you've got your cable tie strain release secured on the back plate, the cables are through, you flip the clock over and you'll see a complete picture of the electronics. So here's some geography. In the clock, the area that is normally exposed is in the middle bottom of the clock. It has got, and of concern, there are a couple of components that you would, over time, be involved with. The first one is, I've highlighted them with blue, 3 relay connectors. Are they all marked blue? Yes, they are. These relay connectors are used for connecting to a siren or to a door or even to a turnstile, and are essentially triggers which are activated when an employee swipes. The triggers are either closed or opened, and that should open the door or the turnstile or set off the siren or bell, depending on the configuration. And we'll get to that a bit later during the presentation. But for commissioning purposes, the most important area to concentrate on is there's a yellow sticker on the board, which I've now highlighted. That, and I think we need to give it a bit more of a, I've given a red little dot underneath as well. Can you see that dot?
Yes, it's there.
That dot shows you where the network cable is plugged in, and next to the network cable, one component removed. I've highlighted the entry point for the power supply, or the barrel connector, which will connect into there. Karina has shown us very nicely how to do that. So in the next slide, you'll see she is plugging in the network cable, and it clips in with the clip end to the top, which makes removing the network cable very easy. And on the next slide, that's the result. We always wrap the cable around on the edge. You'll see there's quite a trough area in the clock, or a duct area in the clock, which allows for lots of cables to run through on the side, out of the way, and allows the cover plate and the back plate to clip into place quite nicely. The next connection will be the power connector. On this screen, you'll see a very nice image of the barrel connector that is used to power up the clock. You simply take the barrel connector and you push it into the socket for the power as shown earlier. After this, your back plate and your cable should look something like the following picture. Now simply take the cover plate, flip it over back onto the clock as you've removed it, push it down, and you're ready to screw those 3 screws back into place to hold the cover plate in place. Once the cover plate is screwed in place, you'll see there's the 3 screws, and the other one's off the picture on top, but they're all put in place. Your strain release is the white cable tie. I will now show you. Let's just draw with a pen. In this area at the bottom, is what we call 2 breakaways. It is a 16mm breakaway, and adjacent to the 16mm breakaway is a 9mm breakaway. And it allows installers or companies who use plastic PVC piping or conduit to break away that area. The cable then slips through this hole created in the clock by clipping the plastic breakaways away, and then the cable fits through snugly into the pipe or conduit. once you're ready with that, you can look at the backplate. In the backplate, if you need a bigger hole or more accessibility for the conduit, you can take the 2 breakaways on the backplate as well. You can take that away as well. And this is all for installers or for companies who wish to use conduit to run their cables. And a lot of companies overseas use drywalls in their premises. So what happens normally is they take the option to use the breakaway that I've now indicated there. It's a circular breakaway. It's a 30mm hole which allows you to go through the back of the clock cable, pull your cables through, connect to the Ethernet connector and to the barrel power connector. So this gives you an option to hide your cables through a drywall, through a wall. Right, now the backplate, which hasn't been affixed to the clock yet, is ready to be installed. Yeah, very, very simple. The backplate has got 3 keyholes, and I have highlighted the 3 keyholes with my blue arrows. And those 3 keyholes, essentially, you can use them as a guideline to make pencil markings on the wall and then screw these screws into place on the wall. We supply the screws, and for customers who use walls and not drywalls, there are wall plugs included in the installation kit for the clock. I like to say that I like my clocks to be mounted square, so to make life more difficult for customers, we decided not to make the top edge straight. Okay, but that doesn't mean you can't get it straight. If you want to use a little water level to make sure that before you make your markings on the wall to drill the screws in, you can use your water level. There's a ridge that I've now highlighted above the keyholes, which you can rest your water level on, and that water level then will give you a true guide of if your clock is mounted square or skew. There's a trick to installing the clock. You'll see on the 2 top screws, those screws are basically slided into the keyhole. The bottom one, we didn't slide into the keyhole, but we screwed it in at the bottom of the keyhole. That allows you to lock the backplate in place. So essentially, without taking away, which I've now circled in yellow, without taking away that screw, no one can remove the clock off the wall. If you feel that there would be that possibility, rather make your marking on the wall on the top of the keyhole, and then the clock will simply slide over all 3 screws on the wall and clip into place. Right, the drill work, the screw work, everything done, we're ready for the next step. Take the clock that was provided in the box, and with the top edge of the clock going into the backplate first, you can now merely or simply click the clock in place, as shown by Kareem. Okay, push slightly down at the bottom and you'll hear a click, and you'll see the cables that you have installed on your clock is visible at the bottom, as shown there. Then all you have to do is take the 2 securing screws, which we took off the clock right in the beginning. Take those, and that basically means no one has removed the clock without using an Allen key and some tools. Right, once you're done with that, it's a simple process of powering up the clock, and we'll get a nice little picture, a blue display showing you date and time once the clock is booted up properly. After this, you're ready to start enrolling customers or employees and start using the clock for time and attendance. This is how simple it is to install the clock. Right, I think maybe at this point, is there any questions? Does anyone want to ask questions via the chat window?
Just got a question from Gareth. Can you maybe give us an idea of the recommended height for installing the clock?
Oh yes, we can. The 2 models of clock, the one is the proximity clock, and because you're using an external device to clock with, you can present a proximity card or tag in any form on the clock that you want. So you can keep it, you can take your arm and you can present it low or high. Your arms are flexible medium. So my recommended height for that clock would still be sort of hip height to shoulder height. And basically for the proximity clock only, you want employees to be able to see the display quite nicely. So eye level for the display is a great position for the clock to be mounted in. The fingerprint reader clock, because you want to present your finger to the clock, you want to install the clock at a height which is easy, accessible to put a finger on. Imagine standing in front of a wall, taking your finger straight out in front of you and putting your finger flat on the wall. That would be the height of the position of the height of the clock. Normally between chest height and shoulder height. It's the easiest position to use when presenting your finger, and would be the ideal height for the clock to be installed at. It allows for a constant, easy accessibility to present your finger on the fingerprint reader clock. All right. Any more questions?
No, you can continue.
All right. The next option for a CS time clock is to allow for external readers. And when we say what's an external reader, I have to reiterate that the CS time clock comes with 3 readers: a built-in keypad reader, a built-in proximity reader as standard, and as a built-in fingerprint reader as an option. But sometimes, especially in environments where, for instance, you'd like employees to clock through a door, it is practical to use what we call an external reader. You could mount the CS time clock as shown on the previous presentation on the one side of the door, and you can use an external reader on the other side of the door. On the picture in front of you now, you'll see that there is 2 sample readers. The one at the bottom, slightly oval shaped, is a proximity reader, and here comes my drawing tool again. There is a clear lens on the reader which will give the employee or the person clocking an indication of has he swiped and accepted, and there will be a little buzz saying thank you very much. The other form of an external reader has, as opposed to a proximity reader only, has an option for a keypad reader or keypad and proximity reader. So with the reader that I've highlighted now, it has got an option for either a keypad reader, so people who want to use PIN numbers to clock in and out, or for people who either want to use a PIN number, or customers who want to use a PIN number and a proximity reader, a prox card, they can use that reader. So that reader comes into separate models, but they look exactly the same, keypad or keypad and proximity. Okay. You can take your external reader and install it on a wall. Say, for example, let's use the door example. On the other side of the door, the gray cable that I've shown now, or the black cable that I've shown now, will go through the wall or through the door frame, go into the back of the clock, through the bottom if we've used the bottom entry, or through the back if we've used the circular access point of the clock. Give you a better idea of what the reader looks like and the connector. The white connector on screen now is what I call a Molex connector. I hope it's called the Molex connector. And this plugs into the clock. I'll show you next how that it happens. And you'll see cable running through to the reader as well. Although on this picture it looks like the reader cable comes through the top, it actually comes through the middle or from the side or from the bottom, depending on how you install that reader. A nice clear view here of the little lens area which will show you a red or a green light when someone swipes in or out, depending on the direction that the reader is set for. Alright, if we're installing the clock with an external reader, we wouldn't have closed the cover plate at the back or the back plate at all. We would have left it exposed with the intention of installing the external reader on the clock. The area where you plug the external readers in on the clock would be on the top left of the clock, which I've sort of marked with the blue arrows now. Those headers, reader headers, represent reader 1, reader 2, and reader 3 on the clock. As a standard, every CS time clock can always take a third reader without much configuration. So to start with, we're going to install the third reader. Now people ask, well, what do you mean a third reader? Well, we count the keypad reader on the clock as reader number 1, the proximity reader as a standard shift always available on the CS time clock as reader number 2, and then the third reader, which is your additional external reader, either a prox reader or a keypad prox reader. And that reader is plugged into the top left header, which I have now made a couple of marks to show you what it would look like. Going to the next, getting closer, you'll see the header for the third reader available for that reader to plug in. The Molex connector shown in the previous second last slide will clip into that reader. Now, a little bit of news. The CS time clock can take up to 3 external readers, and the third reader is connected to the clock simply by plugging it in on that header as marked on your screen at the moment. If you plug in a second reader or a third reader, and they external readers, you will be disabling the keypad reader or the proximity reader on the clock. In other words, the CS time clock can cope with up to 3 readers, whether it is external or internal. If you want to make an internal reader an external reader, you will be losing the functionality of that internal reader by disabling that reader, and I'll show you in the next couple of slides how to do that. So for demonstration purposes, we're going to fit the clock with a third reader, and that third reader plugs into the header shown on this slide. Alright, shown us how the Molex connector of the external reader basically clips into the header now. There are 5 wires going into the header, and the header just slips in over that connector. You can't get it wrong. There is guidelines on the header and on the Molex connector to get the polarity right. Alright, that basically means that once you've powered the clock up, your third reader is ready to go. You can swipe a proximity card on the third reader or type in your PIN number on the third reader. The reader will work as long as the clock is powered. Now, under some conditions, you want to install a second external reader. And to do this, we make a conscious decision to either disable the functionality of the internal proximity reader or the internal keypad reader of the clock. So what we're doing is we're taking away one of those readers and we're making that an external reader. Again, case and example would be for turnstiles, where the clock is mounted further away from the turnstile or on the wall close by to the turnstile or in the frame of the turnstile. This now allows you to take the proximity, take the reader, essentially the proximity reader in the clock, and lengthen it so that it can fit on the side of the turnstile. Again, the process is very simple. You'll take one of the 2 optional external readers and you will plug it into the second or first reader header. Now again, this picture shows Corinne plugging in an external reader on reader number 2. And you'll see it's described at the bottom there. It says on the main board reader number 2. That means we're plugging in the external reader in place of the onboard proximity reader. Once it's clipped in securely, there is a little bit of jiggle width that you need to do by moving the jumper on the board as shown from position 2 and 3 to position 1 and 2. So you take the jumper off and you move them to the position shown. And I think I need to mark this quite nicely with a highlighter over here. Over there and over there. Alright, so you'll see the jumper is now moved from the first pin, pin 1 and 2, over to the second pin 2 and 3. Alright. Okay, what the jumper does is effectively enables the external reader to and disable the proximity reader on the clock. Good. Now the requirement exists. I've got a company, they using my clock for security and they use it at a boom. So when employees arrive at the boom security gate, they take a proximity card and they present it to the clock, and they clock in. And we've now designated that reader 1 as an in reader, or sorry, the third reader as an external reader, and it's an in reader. When he leaves in his car on the other side of the boom, we've lengthened the reader to that side, and we've made it an out reader, and he now presents the reader, his card there, and he clocks out and he goes home through the boom. But trucks also go through that boom, and I don't know if you've seen the trucks lately, they're quite high, and apparently it's a bit of a problem for the truck driver to climb out of his cab, bend down all the way to the reader that's the height of a car, present his tag and climb in again. So an optional third reader can be installed as either an in or an out reader at a higher position. And this is just an example under why you would use that third reader as an external reader at a higher position than, say, your in reader. So imagine having an in reader at 1.5 meters from the floor and another in reader from the same clock at, 2.3 meters from the floor. That basically allows truck drivers to swipe in without having to get out. Simply take your external reader and plug it in on the header 1. When we plug it in on header 1, we're now saying we want to disable the keypad on the clock and enable that as an extended reader or an external reader, and we're using that on reader 1. Okay. Again, once you've installed the third external reader by clipping in the Molex connector into the header, to tell the clock that you've enabled the external reader and disabled the keypad, you must move the second set of jumpers close by from positions 1 and 2 to positions 2 and 3. In this example, we've used a tool just to pick up the headers and move them to the next position. And that is really how simple it is to enable and install external readers.
Rob, this connects or begs the question that I got
Once
from
you've
Gareth.
installed the readers,
Sorry. He asked, is there a limit
Yes.
as to how far the external reader can be from the clock?
Oh, it's a difficult question. If you use the same cabling provided with the external reader, it is an easy 2.5 to 5 meters. We've tested it up to 5 meters. Now, you can take an external reader and install it up to 10 meters, but it depends on the quality of the cable you use to extend that reader with. So the higher the quality, the thicker the copper content of that reader cable is, the better suited it will be to lengthen the cabling more and more and more. But from an installation point of view and a practicality point of view, I think if you put the readers further than 3.5 to 5 meters away from the clock, it sometimes becomes a little bit difficult to, let's say in access control circumstances, where someone clocks on the reader and the reader comes back and says fail. Then it's difficult to walk back 15 meters to the clock to see what the error message was on the clock. Whereas if the reader is set to, say, 3 meters away from the clock, an employee clocks and it says, sorry person, from access control point of view, you're not allowed to clock at this time, you're out of time zone, then it's easy to monitor the clock for those type of messages. Does that answer your question, Gareth?
Yes, he says he actually asked it for a boom gate installation, so you answered his question perfectly. I've also got a question here from Delian. She asks, will there be fingerprint external readers in the future?
Yes, there will be. And that's a very, very good question. Thanks, Delian. The CS TimeClock has, and when I talked about two built-in readers, you'll note I haven't talked about the fingerprint reader at all. The fingerprint reader, although it's a reader, we don't configure it as a reader. It's specifically defined as a fingerprint reader, and it is installed directly on the clock. There is a release of the clock, and that fingerprint reader is built in, and there is no option at this moment to take that reader and make a fingerprint reader an external reader. So when a customer wants an external reader, he's at the moment limited to a proximity reader or a keypad reader or a prox keypad reader combo unit. If, for instance, a customer wants two fingerprint readers back to back, like on the inside of a door and the outside of a door, at the moment he would have to buy two clocks. Put one clock on the one side for fingerprint and one clock on the other side for fingerprint. In the next release of the hardware, coming very, very soon, you will be able to install fingerprint readers as an additional reader, as an additional external reader, which obviously drives the cost down dramatically. So I would probably say, conservatively, in the next 60 days, that feature will be available. Does that answer your question, Dalian?
Yes, she says thanks.
Okay. Any more questions?
No, you can continue.
Okay. Once you've installed the readers on the clocks, they tend to work out of the box. In other words, you don't need to do any configuration. If you've got the external readers configured, you can clock on the one and clock again. And if you're registered as an employee with the right credentials on the the reader will just work. You can, however, do some funky things and set the reader to be only an in reader or just an out reader. And I will show you at the end of the presentation how we configure those options. Now everyone says, whoa, but why would you want to do that? Again, typically from an access control point of view. If you've got a reader on the one side of the door and another reader on the external reader on the other side of the door, typically a person will clock in, say, to the admin building, and he will clock outside. Having the ability to set the clock to only clock in or out allows you to control the direction people are clocking on and prevents them from getting muddled up. Oh, did I clock in or did I clock out? So the direction of the clocking is controlled by the reader the person swipes on. Very nice for access control, also nice for time and attendance. It depends on what application you would be using it for. Now, on a single reader clock, generally what happens is when someone tags or puts in a pin code, the clock looks at your last direction, and depending on the shift rules says, you were in, so your next direction should be an out. In other words, that reader will toggle you. But if you set the reader to be an in reader only in the case of an external reader, then your direction will only be in or out. Alright, and we can configure this through the web interface, which I'll show you after the next hardware installation guide. Right, we're getting to sirens or bells, or even electronic locks. The CS time clock can trigger a siren or a bell or an electronic lock. And when I say electronic lock, you can think of magnetic lock, a electronic 12-volt door latch, or even a turnstile, or what they call a man trap. Any security mechanism. If you've gone through a bank where you have to climb into a cubicle, the one door locks and the other door opens, the CS time clock can control those type of mechanisms. Okay. So part of this demonstration, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to connect or how to use the relays on the CS time clock board. And again, the relays give you a dry contact or a contact point which is triggered, which then has an effect on opening the turnstile, triggering the siren, or opening the magnetic door, depending on what you're using at that stage. For this example, I'm going to use a siren interface. The light on screen will basically represent the bell. To highlight a couple of areas, this is my bell, which has now got a little blue little tag on. Next to the bell on the right hand side is a little square box, and that is my siren interface. Now, a couple of words about a siren interface is that you get two types of sirens or bells or lights out there, a 12-volt one or 110 to 250 volt one. Our clock can safely trigger 12-volt devices, but when you link normal household power devices to our clock, we enforce the use of an interface. And what the interface does is the interface will be powered by 220 or 120 volt, 110 volt, and it will have an output to a 110 or 220 volt device, in this case my light. The clock will then provide a little trigger, a simple little trigger mechanism which is linked into the siren relay or the door strike relay, and once that trigger is opened or closed, the light will go off. So the interface is an isolator to the clock. If something goes wrong with the device, you don't want raw power going through electronic circuitry and blowing up everything. It's easier to replace a cheap siren interface or a door strike interface than it is replacing a whole clock. So in this example, we're going to use a relay, and we're going to connect it to the siren interface. Karina's showing us where the relay is, and typically we've got 3 relays that we can choose of. Now if you install a lot of these clocks, like some of my distributors and dealers and customers do, I recommend you decide which one you're going to be using for which one from an installation and a practicality point of view. In other words, the relay on top we mark as relay number 3, the middle one is relay number 2, and the bottom one is relay number 1. I typically, when I do installations, use the bottom one for sirens, so that I connect the bottom one to the siren, and when I want to set up sirens in the software, I know it is assigned to relay number 1. I don't have to guess or try and double check to see which relay I've used. If you get it wrong, don't worry, leave it installed, because on the web interface it does allow you to assign what relay does what. The top relay I would typically use for in case of a directional device like a turnstile. I use for an in access point, and the middle one I would use for an out access point. But that is purely from, if you do 500 of these, you can. It's easier when a customer phones and says, "What relay must I set it to?" You go, "Oh, out will be relay number 2." On to the next slide. You'll see on the top relay we've removed a connector. The connector block is now basically the 3 screws are unscrewed, and a wire connector is connected into them. At this point, or a wire, in this case we're using a normal flex wire for the demonstration, will be connected into them. Over here, in yellow, I now want to highlight the three possibilities. Each relay on our clock has got in the middle a common, and then on either side either a normal open or a normally closed circuit. So the ground or the common is always connected. Normally closed means that the circuit is always closed and is most typically used for magnetic locks. In other words, the magnetic lock closing, holding a door closed, is always on, but when you trigger, it goes from normally closed or a full circuit, and it breaks the circuit. The magnetic lock doesn't get power and the door goes open. So a good example for using a normally closed circuit would be a magnetic lock. The normally open condition is typically for door strikes and turnstiles, as an example. In other words, when you swipe, the normally open connection makes a brief contact, it triggers the relay on the turnstile, and the turnstile allows you to go through. Relays are rated again for 12 volts. Don't put 120 volt or 250 volt or 220 volts through those relays. Use interfaces if you have to use more than 12 volts DC to power your device. So we took the connector block out, and we got some flex wire, and in this case we're using the normally open and the common options on this connector block. The wire on this connector block, the wire connected to the connector block, now runs to the siren interface, and is essentially a little trigger cable. If you take a metal pin and you bridge these two connections, as shown, can you see those yellow connections?
Mm-hmm.
If you bridge them, your light or your siren will go on. And that would be typically a very good test for you to see if you've made your connections correctly. All right. The relays as a standard of the relay duration of a standard only triggers for a couple of milliseconds, microseconds, and the duration is normally handled by either the turnstile interface, the door strike interface, or even the siren interface. But there are times when you're just plugging in a normal 12-volt device into the relay of our clock, and you can then decide how long you want that relay to trigger for via the software. Now, in the web interface, it allows you to set the relay duration for your siren relays and for your door strike relays independently, which makes it very convenient. Otherwise, your doors would be triggering open for as long as your siren would be going off. All right, so we now have your connections done. We've done our testing. We've shorted out the relays. We've done some software setup, and we are now ready to basically proceed and configure the software. If you've done it all correctly, the light for your siren should trigger. All right, that is the hardware installation done, and it's probably the most complicated yet very, very simple phase of installing the clock. Every CS time clock comes with a web interface built in, and the web interface allows you to configure the device, the clock. It also allows you to add employees, remove employees, set up shift configurations, allocate hours, export all that information to payroll. Basically, it's the management tool. It's a TNA software product built into the hardware. For this exercise, we're not going to go through the clock configuration, but the two areas I'm going to be concentrating on is A, I've installed the clock, what happens next, and B, I've installed the siren, what happens next, and C, oh, I've installed external readers, what can I do with that? So the first thing you do is you log into the clock, and there's the stand available. And and you'll be presented with the Browse Employees list. If you have installed external readers, the first thing you need to do is make accessibility to the menu options available for you is to go through to the clock setup menu, open the clock setup menu and click on clock setup. Ticking on the enable hardware options exposes the menu which allows you to configure external readers. So we're going to tick that on. We're going to say thank you very much. We're now going to save that. We're going to go back to the main screen and we will see the hardware menu at the bottom being available. Now you click on child clocks. And I've installed my clock at the front door and it's got 2 readers. And I click on change and I get to the device details. Over here I've got general configuration, but in particular I can here control the behavior of reader 1, 2, 3 and the fingerprint reader. And just to confirm again, reader 1 is the keypad, reader 2 is the proximity reader, and reader 3 is the external reader by default. Now going back to reader number 1, you can set up the TNA direction. I previously said to you, if you want a reader to dictate the direction in and out, here you say the TNA reader is in. So when a time and attendance clocking arrives through the web interface or in your software product, you'll see that if it's clocked on reader 1 and it was an external reader, or even for that matter if it was the internal reader, it will now always clock the person in if he's used the external reader connected to reader 1. For access control, you've got the option to say he's clocking in for TNA and he's clocking in to a specific area. You can set that over here as well. The same would be if you've added reader number 2 or reader number 3. By selecting the TNA direction and access effect, you can decide what the clocking would be that is collected from the clock had he swiped on one of those 2 readers or one of those 3 readers. Again, toggle mode would be the ability, and back to reader 1, toggle mode would be the ability for the reader to decide based on your last clocking event whether it should be an in or an out. Now, I've spoken to you about a turnstile installation, and we have said reader 2 and reader 3 will be used to control the direction of a turnstile. I'm just going to click over to reader 2. Now, a good example would be to say as reader 2 would be the in reader, and I wanted to trigger relay number 1, and for access I wanted to trigger relay number 1. So connecting your clock's relay number 1 to the in trigger of the turnstile interface will now have the effect that the turnstile allows you to walk in when you clock on reader number 2 of this year's time clock. To finalize your setup, you'll go to reader number 3, and on the turnstile this will be if you'd like to clock going home or going to the outside. So we say, right, your TNA direction is out, access direction is going into the outside, and oh, by the way, I've connected relay number 2 to the turnstiles out relay, and you'll basically tick on relay number 2 for TNA out and for area out. You can now click on the Save button to save your settings. Once you've saved your settings and you go to the turnstile and you, for instance, clock on what you think should be your in reader, but the turnstile is swinging the wrong way. Now typically in the old days what the technician would do is he'd take a screwdriver, climb into the top of the turnstile or the gate, change a couple of connections on top, come down, and then it would work again. But in the software we have given you the option to say no, sorry, I connected it wrong internally, but I can now say, sorry, I got my relays mixed up. It should be relay number 2, and you can change it to relay number 2, and you can swap your relays around like this, and you'll find that when you now clock on the turnstile after saving this record, the turnstile will trigger the right way. Very, very handy if the last thing you want to do is climb up into a greasy mechanism again. We spoke earlier about the duration. Now, typically, door strike interfaces, turnstile interfaces, man-trap interfaces have got a adjustment setting which allows you to set the duration of how long the relay will stay open and how long the turnstile will rotate. But TNA has also got the option for you to set the duration of how long TNA will trigger. Oh, sorry, the CS time clock has also got an option for you with how long it will trigger the relay in the turnstile, or the interface in the turnstile and the interface on the door. If you set your duration here to 0, you will get it will not trigger the interface at all. In units of 10 milliseconds, we found that we probably setting them to about 50 milliseconds gives you the best performance if you are connecting your clock to a door strike interface or a turnstile interface. Sometimes you'll find that setting the relay duration, you'll have to set it differently for different types of interfaces. But when you use our interfaces, you'll quickly learn that setting it to 50 milliseconds is more than ample. While you're looking at that, there's a little option on top there called quiet mode. I always tell that because we've got all these vuvuzelas in Cape Town at the moment cheering for the World Cup. Quiet mode basically tells the clock that disable the buzzer on board, please. So if you are presenting a tag, the clock would tell you, thank you, welcome in, and it'll make a green light go on and it'll make a buzzer go beep beep. If you want to disable that noise the buzzer makes, quiet mode will do that for you. Okay, tip of the day. Alright, we're going to moving over to setting up the siren time. Is there any questions so far?
Gareth, when you disable the onboard keypad by connecting an external reader, does the normal menu function of the onboard keypad still work on the clock?
It does, but you can't get to it. And that's a very, very good question. Your keypad menu on the clock is controls. Yeah, your keypad menu on the clock. Your keypad controls a menu on the clock. So disabling the keypad means you don't have access to the keypad or the menu on the clock anymore. But for access control purposes, where you typically have software packages installed which is talking to the CS time clock, the menu option on the clock becomes less and less of a requirement. Is that okay, Gareth?
He says yes, thank you.
Cool. Right. Now, when we started setting up the external readers, we disabled the siren. We went into the clock setup, and I'll show you briefly, and we enabled advanced hardware options. I'm going to untick this But at the same time, I'm going to ask you to look at the bottom left of the screen under the hardware menu. You'll see there's a sirens there. The siren option is always enabled by default, or is always available by default. But if you don't have advanced hardware options ticked, it falls under the setup menu, just above the hardware menu. Now I'm going to save this record, and you will now see your hardware menu doesn't exist anymore, but sirens is now available as an option under the setup menu. So for customers who are not using child clocks and they're not using external readers, the option to set up sirens is always available and would be standard available under the setup menu. Right, we click on sirens. And I have already, for part of this exercise, added a siren time to the clock. But typically, we would go and we would insert a siren time by clicking on the insert button on screen. Now, in South Africa and in Europe, even in a couple of companies that we've got as clients in Australia and the US, bells are used to indicate the start of shifts and the end of shifts. Also sometimes the start of lunch breaks and the end of lunch breaks. And we tend to work with two types of bell. A warning bell, which is a very short bell, like a bit of a warning signal, 5 minutes before going on to lunch, people. Or more typically what happens is it's a warning bell to say lunch is going to end in 5 minutes. And that is normally a short 3-second bell. And then when the lunch ends, that would be a 5 to a 10-second bell. Now, if we set up lunchtime bell, let's say it's 1300, and you say, well, lunchtimes are applicable for all days of the week except Saturdays and Sundays because we don't work. And I have connected my siren to relay 1, my standard relay. And this is my lunchtime bell, which will be a 5-second bell. Okay, now going back to relays. The relay, the buzzer relay, is a very, very nice little tool for, and I've highlighted it over there. It's a very nice little tool for people who don't want to install a siren, don't really have to have a layout siren. They don't have a factory. They've got a more like a big admin office, and a noisy buzzer will suffice. So if you click on the buzzer will sound at the time that you've entered on the top of the siren table or the siren form now. Remember, if you set the clock to quiet clock, the buzzer will not go off. So you can't have both of best of both worlds. You can't say the clock must be quiet but still make a noise when you want a siren to go off, or as a buzzer. But the siren will go off if it's connected to a relay, even though the clock is set to quiet mode. Right. So for part of this exercise, we're going to say we want the buzzer to go off as well. And the description will be lunchtime, and this is for reference purposes in web interface. And you can actually say the clock display must show something, and you can type in lunchtime again, and when the lunchtime bell goes, the display will show for a couple of seconds the word lunchtime again. If you save this record, you will see that I've got my start time at 1300, 1 o'clock, 8 o'clock. Okay. I did show you that I've set the duration of the siren. Or the buzzer to 5 seconds, and adjusted. I'm just waiting for, lag. So I can see we're catching up a little bit green. If I go back to my update siren table, which you can see now, I can change the duration to 3 or to 4 or to 5 seconds. Tip of the day, when it comes to sirens, which is more a motor-based unit, they wind up for the first 2 or 3 seconds. So depending on what type of siren, and we've got a couple that we've come across, a Banshee is probably the most popular one. The Banshee normally takes about 2 seconds before it starts making a noise. So a short bell for a bungee would be 3 seconds, maybe 4 seconds, and a long bell 5 or 6 seconds. But 1 second for a bungee or a circular siren would not work. It would not have enough time to fire up, wind up, to make a noise. Alright, so once you've set up the siren times and you close the window, you're ready to go, and essentially you can continue adding more siren times for the rest of the day. Once you've added a siren time, the siren time on the clock is immediately effective. In other words, if you set up the siren time at 2 minutes to 3, sorry, at 2 minutes to 1, at 1 o'clock the bell or the buzzer on the clock will go off. And that is really how easy it is to add and add external readers and sirens to the clock.
Rob, for sake of reference, the number of sirens that you can add? Rob?
Yes. The question is, how many sirens can you have? Right. If you don't use... Okay, how many sirens can you have, or siren events can you schedule on the clock? It's unlimited. There's no limitation. But I would think if you've got one every minute of the day, you're probably going to have a lot of noise in your factory. So, and what happens quite often is that people tend to decide they've got multiple of different shifts running in a factory, and they say, well, for every shift end we want a siren to go off. So after 120 entries for 5 days, you look at the siren table and you actually realize that the siren will go off at approximately 10 minutes or 15 minutes every now and then, which makes the siren as a warning device pretty useless. So although I'm saying that from a product point of view, we can have up to, I don't know, 1,000 sirens for the week or 2,000 sirens for the week, it doesn't mean it's practical setting up 1,000 sirens for a week. If the siren goes off every 5 minutes, it loses the novelty value as a warning device. How's that for the answer?
Oh, that's perfect. Also, with reference to another clock that we've worked with before, can you set up siren times at any time of the day, or is there only specific intervals that you can use?
That clock has been updated as well, Corinne. But
okay.
The siren times, you can set the siren time of this of the event you want to do for any time of the day. 1 minute past 1, 2 minutes past 1. It's not. You pick the time. You can set the siren time, and also, if you only want it to go off once a week, you can pick what day of the week it has to go off, and obviously the duration as well. All right, I think I want to touch briefly today's seminar, or just conclude briefly. Today's seminar was, let's install a clock, let's install some external readers, and maybe even connect a siren to the clock so that we get maximum functionality. The clock has got an enormous amount of capabilities. We can add other clocks to this clock, which is controlled by this clock. We can add access control functionality. We can add job costing functionality, and those more technical and more up-end features will be dealt with from in other webinars. So this is the first of the second of the series of webinars, and we'll get progressively more technical and more involved in the product itself as the webinars go from number 2 to number 100. So yeah, I think from my side, thanks very much for everyone attending. It was good this afternoon. We only had one drop in internet connection. It's always a bonus. And thanks for Kareem for organising it.
Okay, not a problem. Thank you very much. Gareth also is saying thanks, Rob. Great presentation. Thank you for everyone attending. We'll do another one soon. And have a nice day. Thank you.